The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
All right, the day before the biggest eating day of the year. For some of us, maybe the greatest day of the year. I mean, what's not to like about Thanksgiving, right? Food, football, family. Oh, fantastic. Just great. The day after, you realize you put on some weight and make your resolutions, but then, here comes the Christmas season and everybody bringing cookies into the office and things like that. So it's all got to wait till the first of the year. So, basically we're kicking off like 5-6 weeks here of massive eating, followed by a reset at the beginning of 2024. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here. Talk about the Commanders going to Dallas tomorrow. 10.5-point underdogs. And the thing about the Cowboys is they have beaten up on bad teams. They have played the Eagles close. They've lost some close games, but against bad teams, they have feasted. They feasted on the Giants, and they are likely to feast on the Commanders tomorrow. But you never know. You never know. That's why they play the game. We'll get to that. Also, Barry Sanders has a documentary out about his life called Go, Barry, Go, which is creating a little bit of controversy with a former Lions quarterback who played with Sanders, Scott Mitchell. He's come out and blasted it, but Sanders did a really good interview yesterday with Dan Patrick, who's featured in the documentary. I guess they're friends, and the way Patrick was talking in this interview, they go back a long way, like to when Sanders was at Oklahoma State. So he's known him for 35 years or more, and they seem to be friends. So we'll play some of that coming up. Comments from Sam Howell about his first trip to Dallas as a starter. He was there last year as a backup. I don't even think he was activated. I'm not sure, but I don't think he was even in uniform for that. So he's going to go to Dallas and play for the first time tomorrow. And Tom Brady, and we'll play what Tony and Mike said on PTI about it last night, but I wonder how this is going to go over if, in fact, he goes through with the plan to become an analyst for Fox. I still don't think that's going to happen, even though they're due to pay him $37.5 million a year. But if it happens, will he be able to talk on Fox as he was talking with Stephen A. Smith yesterday as a retired football player? We'll get to that in the 10 o'clock hour. But if you are of my age or older, you can't think of November 22nd in any other way than the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Happened 60 years ago today. I turned 65 in August. I have to be among the youngest living people with any recollection of that. I can't imagine if you were 4 years old that you could have any comprehension of that or even remember anything from when you were 4. I have a few memories of when I was 4, but 60 years ago today is the first significant world event that I can remember. Maybe there were things that were mentioned to me before, I don't know, but my recollection is like a lot of people my age that we had trouble fully grasping it, but there are certain things that stick out about the moment. And Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia wrote an op-ed piece in the Post today, and he is almost exactly my age. He was 5 years old, he said. He was in kindergarten, living in Overland Park, Kansas. I was living in Bethesda, so a D.C. suburb of a big city. He was living in Overland Park, Kansas. Walked home from school, from kindergarten at lunch. In those days, kindergarten was a half a day around here. I don't know where it was, how it was in Kansas, but he went home and he saw his mother watching television and crying. And she told him that President Kennedy had been shot. And Kaine writes, I could hardly understand what this word meant, but it made my mother cry. It clearly was earth-shattering. And 2 days later, he said his mother walked in to see him sitting in front of the television, and on the screen was the president lying in state in the U.S. Capitol, his casket beneath the magnificent rotunda, surrounded by a steady stream of dignitaries and visitors. I was drawing a picture of what I saw, and it was a casket covered by a flag, a building, a larger flagpole dominated the scene. My mother asked me to write my name on the picture, then added her own handwritten label, Timmy K., November 24th, 1963. She put it in a folder. She kept one for each of her 3 sons with class pictures, report cards, school awards, and it stayed there for 50 years. And then the parents downsized in 2013, so 10 years ago, and she gave him the picture, and he holds it to this day. And that was his way of expressing himself, I guess, with this picture. And they have a picture of it in the paper here. It's a typical 5-year-old drawing, and that's how he processed this. My recollection is not all that different. Remember, it was a really warm day around here. November 22nd, we were sitting out on our front step with the neighbors. We lived on a court, and people used to socialize more because we didn't have our faces buried in phones all the time. And my mother didn't watch soap operas, so we were sitting outside, I just remember. And we went for a ride. She took us for a ride in the car to go somewhere. And it was me and my brother. And she's driving along, and she has the radio on. And that's pretty typical. My mother always kept the radio on, usually listened to talk radio. She was not really a music listener. And then all of a sudden, and I can remember it to this day, she pulled the car over to the side of the road, and she started to cry. And just like Senator Tim Kaine, that was the first time I had seen my mother cry. And it was really powerful. And what had happened while she was driving and listening to the radio, she didn't process it right away. She thought that she was listening to a recreation of the Lincoln assassination. And then when she finally realized what was being reported, she reacted like I think most adults at that time was, oh my God, the president of the United States has been shot and killed. It was unimaginable at that time. This is 5 years before Bobby Kennedy, 5 years before Martin Luther King. I mean, those kind of things just weren't happening at that time. We're coming off the prosperity of the 50s, and people are having young families like ours and moving ahead, and there was great optimism in this country. And then the most tragic of events happens on this day in 1963. So that's my memory, and it stays with me to this day. And over the last 50 years, I think this is the story that has been referred to more often in history than any other. And even now, Rob Reiner has a documentary coming out with new information that there is now a reason to believe that there was a conspiracy, that Oswald did not act alone. The magic bullet theory has been debunked, the one that passed through Kennedy and hit Senator John Connally. I mean, those, who knows? And they did the Warren Commission report, and they looked into all this, and they came out with the conclusion that Oswald acted alone. Those who have said, oh, it's impossible for somebody to have a shot from on top of the building where he was, the book depository in Dallas, which I'm very familiar with because I worked just a couple of blocks away for 2 years when I was in Dallas from 81 to 83 at the Dallas Morning News building. And so it was only about 3 blocks away in Dealey Plaza. So I had a view of where that window was and where the limousine would have been when Kennedy was shot. And I've said this a number of times over the years, a discussion that I had with John Riggins, who's an avid hunter. He said to me, no, if you have any training whatsoever with a rifle and a scope, you can hit that shot. The limousine was not moving that fast. And in fact, Lee Harvey Oswald had been trained in the military with a gun. So, I would think that over the course of the last 60 years that something would have come out on this, but who knows? There's been movies made like the JFK movie by Oliver Stone. There's been many, many documentaries on this, and we still don't know. And as Rob Reiner calls it, it's the number one murder mystery in the history of the world. Who shot John F. Kennedy? But that's far afield from really where I want to go here, and that is the sports angle of this. And there is a sports angle. It's a very good column today by Fred Frommer in the Post about how the NFL reacted to that, and I'll get to that. But I did want to play this, and I'm sure you've seen this over the years. It's in the Smithsonian. It is probably one of the earliest live bulletins on television. This is, again, 1963, so CBS is running soap operas. It's not easy to get a news broadcast on the air. In those days, you had to warm up the cameras. It took about 30 minutes. They had never gone through a drill like this before, mobilizing everybody to get Walter Cronkite behind a desk in the newsroom, light the studio properly. They didn't have cell phones in those days, so there's no reporter on the scene in Dallas to tell them what's going on there. Certainly there's no live television hookup at that point, and as we all know, the only video or film of what happened is the Zapruder film, the Abraham Zapruder, who was using his movie camera, his Super 8 movie camera, to take pictures, and that is inconclusive as to where the bullets came from, and just, we just have the still pictures of that as the film is broken down. But this is it. It's Cronkite in a newsroom, and what I'm going to play is what you've heard a million times over the years. But if you go to YouTube and watch this, there's about 7 or 8 minutes of run-up to this where Cronkite is reading various reports from people who saw what happened off the wires. This is how information was disseminated 60 years ago. You had UPI machines, you had AP machines, and they actually typed out copy, the keys, and you'd rip the copy off the machine, and somebody was handing Walter Cronkite these bulletins. And finally, after talking for about 7 or 8 minutes, reading all these bulletins, Cronkite saw the one that, as you'll hear, made him choke up.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded. Presumably, he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become the 36th President of the United States.
It is stunning to watch that. And Walter Cronkite, the best of the best, even he choked up at that moment because that's how the country felt. This young, beautiful family. John F. Kennedy was in his 40s. His wife, Jackie, beautiful woman in her 30s, 2 very young children, and Caroline and John. And people related to that. And it was called the Camelot years because the country was feeling like, wow, we're out of World War II. That's in the rearview mirror. Vietnam really hadn't cranked up at that point, and we were living in an age of prosperity and beauty. And it all came crashing down with the shots from Dealey Plaza. Now, this was discussed a lot when we had 9/11, whether or not to play football games. 9/11 happened on a Tuesday. This happened on a Friday, so there's less time here. 9/11, initially, there was some thought that the NFL would play games, and then because of the airspace being shut down, that nobody was flying, it would become impossible for teams to play games. So they closed off that weekend for the season, wound up postponing it to the end of the year and postponing the Super Bowl for a week. But in 1963, with 2 days to go, the NFL made a decision under then young Commissioner Pete Rozelle, who was 37 years old at the time, to play the games. You had teams that were, most of the time teams traveled on a Saturday, but if they had to go far, like to the West Coast, sometimes they would leave on Friday, and they're making arrangements to go. And Rozelle is wondering what to do. Now, he later said this was the biggest mistake of his tenure as commissioner. He'd only been on the job for 3 years, and he later said it was a major mistake. But he called the White House press secretary, Pierre Salinger, who he actually knew. They had been students together at the University of San Francisco. And it was Salinger who said to him that he felt like Kennedy would have liked for them to play, and it would be good for the nation, for the people to get a diversion. So he encouraged Rozelle to let the games be played, and the games were played. And I have talked to 2 players in particular who played in them, both of them the year before they came to Washington, Sam Huff and Sonny Jurgensen. Sam was playing for the Giants, and Sonny was playing for the Eagles, ironically against the Redskins, who were in Philadelphia. And this is also a point that Frommer makes in his column today, that can you imagine if the game had been scheduled in Washington, a football game would have been played 20 blocks from the Capitol Rotunda where Kennedy's body had lay in state. I mean, think about that and all the other things that went along with this. And he brings up some things that I was not aware of. The feelings about Dallas as a city, as if it was Dallas's fault that the president was killed, and the booing that took place for the team, as if the team had something to do with it. And it's just a bad feelings all around. And Sonny said he took the field and he said, I don't really understand how we're playing this game. And Sam, I believe, was active in politics and knew Bobby Kennedy well. He said it was just ridiculous that they had to play on that day. But they went ahead with it, and the game was played. The Army-Navy game, which was scheduled for that weekend, that was postponed 2 weeks. They played that 2 weeks later. And it's one of Roger Staubach's most famous games. As a matter of fact, Staubach was going to be on the cover of Life magazine that week, which was a big deal at that time. And that cover was never printed, of course, because they had the coverage of the Kennedy assassination. And, I think you've probably seen over the years the picture that they took with Staubach in his Naval Academy uniform. He did win the Heisman that year. And as a matter of fact, the game that they played against Army in Philadelphia 2 weeks later was historic in a big way for television, because that was the first game where they used instant replay for the first time. They had been working on the technology. They had planned to use it on the game that would have been on the 24th of November. Instead, it's 2 weeks later. And we got to see instant replay for the first time. There's one other big television note about this, and it also tells you how much sports have changed in the last 60 years and the influence of television. Even though the games went on, the games were played, and in those days, this was just the NFL. I'm not sure what the AFL did. The AFL may have postponed their games, but the NFL went on. And in those days, all of their games were televised on CBS. CBS was the NFL network, and there were only 14 teams, so there were 7 games. Not one of them was televised because CBS, as a responsible news operation, was televising coverage of the Kennedy funeral, and that that is something that would never ever happen today. They would not play an NFL game without television coverage. But the only people who saw those games, those 7 games that were played, were the people who were in the stadiums that day. And they did draw some big crowds. They had 63,000 at Yankee Stadium for the Giants-Cardinals game. People did show up, and it was, as Pierre Salinger said, a diversion for them, but not necessarily for the country, because they weren't watching this on TV, and not for the teams as well. That it is looked upon as the worst move of the Rozelle administration as commissioner, and he did a great job. I think he's the most important commissioner in the history of sports, but he made a blunder here, and that, as you know, was referred to in the decision to postpone the games in 9/11. So those are my memories, and again, I have to be among the youngest people to have memories of Kennedy being assassinated 60 years ago today. And sadly, we've lost a lot of people whose memories are far greater than mine, people who were involved in the coverage. I don't know how many reporters are still alive from that day, or people that I know in the documentary that Rob Reiner put together. They have found some who worked in the emergency room at the time. I mean, these would have to be people in their 20s at the time, or now in their 80s, maybe close to 90. So it's ancient history for a lot of people, but for people my age and older, it is still very raw and still very memorable 60 years ago today when John F. Kennedy was killed. Some lighter stuff coming up, promise. We'll get to the game. We will get to what Barry Sanders said about his new documentary called Bye Bye Barry, and he talked about it yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show. We'll get what he said about it as we continue with the Andy Poland Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Poland Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Hey, we got Tony coming up today as we head into the Thanksgiving weekend. By the way, just so you'll maybe remember, if you're rolling around on Friday morning, heading to the Black Friday sales or wherever you're going, we're going to have a show here. Live show from 9 to noon, and with the Commanders playing tomorrow, I think it's important to be here. And look, if Ron Rivera, for some reason, gets fired on Friday, we'll be here with live coverage to talk about it. And so I urge you that if you are so inclined and are out and about and want to tune in ESPN 630, I will be here on Friday morning. All right, Barry Sanders is one of the most interesting athletes we've ever had. Like Jim Brown, he walked away from the game at the top. He was in his prime. He was on his way to breaking Jim Brown's record. I don't think there's any question. Well, actually, Emmitt Smith's record, because Emmitt Smith had gone past. I think he had gone past, or maybe it was Walter Payton. Whatever. I mean, when he left, when Barry Sanders left, there was about 3 years of, hey, Barry, why'd you leave? Well, you want to come back? You can still play. Nope. Walked away. Never looked back. Didn't really like attention. If you remember this, he would do interviews, but he didn't celebrate much in the end zone. He was just a workmanlike guy. And look, even his dad, and his dad is going to be in this documentary I'm going to talk about here in a minute. Even his dad said that Jim Brown was a better running back, or was his favorite running back. Let's put it that way. Jim Brown was his favorite running back, not Barry Sanders. And look, I've gotten in these arguments over the years with a lot of people about this. I think that Emmitt Smith was a better back than Barry Sanders. And you go, wow, look at the highlight film. How could you possibly say that? Yeah, that's what he was. He was a highlight film guy. He had some spectacular runs. But to me, he's a lot like Dave Kingman. He was always swinging for the fences, and he hit some monstrous home runs. But Kingman was like a 210 hitter, and he was either a strikeout or a home run. And Sanders was the same thing. And I think in the NFL, the goal is to move the chains. And I think Emmitt really did that well. Barry Sanders, there were a lot of 3-and-outs when he was looking for a big hitter and couldn't find it, got caught behind the line of scrimmage, and the Lions had to punt. Now, a lot of the narrative about his career is, well, he never had a quarterback. It was a bad organization, yada, yada, yada. Who knows? Sometimes they had some decent teams. They actually did play here in the NFC Championship game after the 91 season. Wasn't a close game, but that's as far as they've gotten since they won their last title in 1957. And also, when we head into this time of year, we think about Barry Sanders because he was always on your TV on Thanksgiving and always seemed to have huge games. Lions didn't necessarily win, but watching number 20 running across your screen was part of Thanksgiving tradition for a decade. And so now the documentary is out. It's on Amazon Prime. And Sanders was on yesterday to talk to Dan Patrick, who is in the documentary. And Patrick accurately asked the question, well, I thought you didn't like to draw attention to yourself.
That's true. And when you see the doc, you'll see that still, Dad does most of the talking.
He always did.
He always did. So even in this documentary, my dad does most of the talking, and I just have a few parts here and there.
Well, I remember when your dad said you're no Jim Brown, and it really hit me. I'm like, your son's pretty good, and
you liked that, didn't you? You liked that line from him, didn't you?
I did. I was like, okay, and I realized you were never going to be, your dad's favorite running back, which is okay.
But because even as a kid, he would always talk about Jim Brown. And so from a very early age, I was programmed,
But were you always trying to get your dad to finally say, you're great, or you're my favorite running? I don't know if you were seeking Dad's approval on this thing.
I don't think that ever even crossed my mind, honestly. I knew that I knew that I was at least one of his favorites.
What did you learn about you in this documentary?
What did I learn about me? I mean, I don't know that anything just really stands out.
But other people talking about you that maybe you didn't realize how they felt at the time or what they think now. Did you? Your kids?
I didn't realize how much you got on my case at draft day.
You were terrible that day.
You were getting.
You were terrible. I go out there to cover the draft. You get selected. I can't find you. I'm out there specifically to interview you. And then I have to tell ESPN, they go, I thought you're friends with Barry. I said, so did I. I can't find him. And then I'm like, I was mad at you. I was like, what are you doing here?
Hey, look, I was at home waiting for an important phone call, man.
But once you got drafted.
Oh yeah, I don't know. Once I got drafted, I'm sure it took me a while to get out of the neighborhood.
Oh, stop. Stop. Who did you think was going to draft you?
No, I knew that, or I had a good idea that the Lions were going to draft me, just because of conversations that I had with Coach Fonts beforehand, where he explained that if I'm available at 3 or whatever, then they would pick me. Which I mean, you never know until it actually happens. You never know until it actually happens. But that was sort of my expectation going into the draft.
So that's part one with Barry Sanders about his documentary Bye Bye Barry on Amazon with Dan Patrick, who is in it. Now you get to the question of why he walks away. Why did he leave? He didn't win. He didn't get to a Super Bowl, but he still had time to do that. I mean, he could have conceivably played 4 or 5 more years and walked away. And this leads to, I think, what is a significant question from Patrick as well.
Did you love football?
Are you serious? Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. I think you love basketball. I think you were great at football. And then when you don't win, then, I mean, you walked away.
No, I definitely love football. I mean, maybe I like them equally, or I certainly enjoy playing basketball as well. In my free time, and even as a player in the NFL, I play a lot of basketball. But there's certainly just different games, in a lot of ways. But I think I had great love for both of them. But I certainly loved football and had a passion for it. And I think, it's different when you do it for a living. And you do it as long as I did it. It can become sort of a different sort of relationship with the game. But no, I would definitely say I loved it, and even still enjoy it to this day.
I mentioned, I think it's in the documentary, that there's nobody I've ever covered who's been like Barry. And I remember when you called me and said you were getting a new car. And do you remember this? And you didn't want to get anything flashy, but you were worried this might be flashy. And you were getting a Honda 4-door Accord. And you said, is that too fancy? And I go, nope, I think it's pretty good. I don't think that's too flashy there.
I don't remember that specific conversation, but I did. It was actually an Acura I owned, which is kind of a Honda. I think that's the car you're referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That might be a rich guy's Honda, is the Acura. So, you good. Plus, when I went into your house, you had a couch and a TV and nothing else.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're talking about, days fresh out of college. So I was, my decor was, dressed up like the dorm room.
If you guys, okay, here's something I know you told me a long time ago, that maybe if you could have played for the Raiders, you would have continued to play football. Remember saying that? You grew up a Raider fan.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly grew up a big Raiders fan. And I don't know, once I got toward the end of my career, I don't know when I told you that, but that sounds like something I would have said maybe at the beginning or middle, but I don't know that at the end of my career I would have felt the same way. I mean, I don't know. I mean, they went to a Super Bowl, I guess, a year or two after I retired.
You're the one that brought it up because this was towards the end of your career.
Was it?
Yeah. Was there any thought of you playing elsewhere at the end of your career?
No, not really. That's not something I ever insisted on or had a conversation about with the team. So it's not something I ever actually put any energy towards. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I could hear myself making that statement, but no, it's not something I actually tried to make happen.
Yeah. So there's that. He did stay his whole career in Detroit, played 10 years, didn't go someplace else. Now to the part where he talks about Joe Montana. And this has gotten a former Lions quarterback who played with Barry all up in arms. Oh, boy, is he upset. And we'll get to that in a moment. There's Joe Montana's story. As you know, he was with San Francisco, are in the conversation as the greatest of all time, maybe a notch below Brady. And if the circumstances were right, maybe he's better than Brady. Some might argue he is. He's in the conversation as the greatest of all time. So in the playoff game, the championship game of 1990, the 90 season, January 91, they're playing the Giants, who would go on to beat Buffalo in the Super Bowl. And late in the game, Montana gets knocked out from a hit from Leonard Marshall that is so severe that Montana misses all of the 91 season and most of 92. And so it becomes now Steve Young's team. And Montana still wants to play. He thinks he's got something left in the tank, and he knows it's not going to happen for him in San Francisco, that, they all this time that Steve Young spent waiting to play behind him. What is there, 3, maybe 4 years before he finally got to be the number one quarterback? And Bill Walsh, or not, it wasn't Bill Walsh, I guess, at the time. It was whoever it was. They weren't going to make a change at quarterback. And so he knew that he had to go someplace else to play. Believe it or not, I did not know this till I heard this yesterday. The first choice was Detroit because Montana wanted to play with Barry Sanders, who was at the peak of his game. He's been in the league 5-6 years at this point. This is going into, I guess, the 94 season or the 93 season. Yeah, 93 season. So it's like his 4th year in the league. And Montana looks at that and says, man, especially in those days where the running game was such a bigger part of football, we got Barry Sanders, the best running back in the game, and I'm going to be playing my games indoors so I don't have to worry about weather, especially late in the season. This might be a perfect situation for me. So, as Barry tells it here, believe it or not, Joe Montana called up the Detroit Lions coach at the time, Wayne Fonts, and said, hey, you think you'd like to have me play for you?
Coach Fonts tells the story that, that Joe called him up, and he was excited, obviously, and said, Joe said he wanted to come and play in Detroit. This was obviously as he was leaving the Niners and before he signed with the Chiefs. And Coach Fonts took that word back to the organization, and I guess, they thought Joe Montana was too old or whatever at that point, and so the deal didn't happen. I feel like, by the way, one of his last games, regular season games with the Niners, was against the Lions, and he just tore us up. He torched us. Montana did. But anyway, so obviously he goes on to the Chiefs and has a couple of great years there. But wouldn't that have been something? Wow. Wouldn't that have been something?
Yeah, well, you wonder why an organization like the Lions doesn't win until now. Those are the kind of decisions that you make. Joe Montana is there for the taking. Not too old. And I think he led the Chiefs. I'm sure he did. He led the Chiefs to the AFC Championship game. They lost to Buffalo, but he got them there. And, and the Lions did not want him. Okay, all right. Anyway, this story about Joe Montana has gotten a former Lions quarterback, Scott Mitchell, all up in arms. And Mitchell put out on a Facebook rant yesterday, I just watched Bye Bye Barry on Amazon Prime. It was not a very pleasant experience. I was Barry Sanders' teammate for 5 years. I had a front row seat to some of the most amazing plays in NFL history. He will never have an equal as a pure runner in the NFL. I could argue that there were several running backs that were more complete, but I won't. Barry was great. I would agree with that. I would call Emmitt Smith a more complete back, but yes, as a spectacular pure runner, Barry Sanders is near the top of the conversation. He says, though, this is Mitchell, however, I am so tired of hearing how I was the reason that Barry Sanders never won a Super Bowl. I am so tired of hearing about how I was not a good quarterback. My only response is F you all, and that includes Eminem and Jeff Daniels, who are both in this. I guess they're both Detroit natives, so they had their say as fans, and they dumped on Scott Mitchell, it appears. And they blamed the Lions' lack of success on the fact that they didn't have a quarterback. Now, Mitchell came to the Lions before the 94 season, so that's when about the time that Montana would have gotten there. He had some games filling in for Dan Marino the year before with the Dolphins. I remember Marino tore his Achilles, and Mitchell came in and played pretty well, and he was a free agent after that season, so it was at the perfect time. The Lions signed him to a huge contract, and he played well at times. 95, he threw for 4,300 yards and 32 touchdowns. The team finished 10-6, but he also threw a lot of interceptions and wasn't, to me anyway, wasn't that good. And in fact, the Barry Sanders thing kind of worked in his favor to get another contract from the Ravens. When he went to Baltimore, I remember Brian Billick saying this. He said, yeah, you really can't judge Scott too much on what happened in Detroit because a lot of drives were 3 and out because Barry Sanders was always trying to hit the home run, which I agree with. But it really didn't elevate Mitchell. Mitchell was, I mean, he had an okay career, a good career, but not the career he thinks he had, and I don't think he was as good as he thinks he is. But that's what got him upset, that the people say, oh, well, you could have had Joe Montana, a real quarterback. They also tried to get Warren Moon, didn't get that done, but Mitchell got a 3-year, $11 million contract, which in 1994 was a hell of a lot of money. He goes on to say in this Facebook rant, I can't even begin to tell you what a disappointment it is to hear my own coach, Wayne Fontes, who went out in free agency and actively pursued me to the point of begging me to come to Detroit, say that they wanted Joe Montana or Warren Moon and that the only thing that was missing from the team winning the Super Bowl was a quarterback. A little support from the coach might have gone a long way. Wayne never had my back. Well, I would say to you, Scott Mitchell, if my first two choices were Hall of Famers and maybe the greatest of all time in Joe Montana and Warren Moon, I would say that I would make those runs first before I would come at Scott Mitchell. And the begging maybe was they were getting down to the deadline and they needed a quarterback. They couldn't get a Hall of Fame quarterback, but they needed a quarterback. And he thought enough of you to give you what was big money at the time, 3 years, $11 million. So, let's have a little bit of perspective on this and realize that you were not the first choice there, okay? And Wayne Fontes may have been begging, but he was begging after really begging a couple of other guys who would have done a lot better for him than Scott Mitchell did. 6 career postseason games, Sanders ran for 386 yards and a touchdown on 91 carries. That's not good. That's like 60 yards a game. Yeah, about 60 yards a game. And Mitchell said, bottom line, Barry Sanders had everything in Detroit. No, he didn't. He didn't have a Hall of Fame quarterback. And he said, we are all to blame for not winning a Super Bowl, even Barry Sanders. Yes, that's true. But, hey, a little perspective here, Scott. And I think the Montana story is interesting. It is something that you would put in a documentary. And it does tell the story of why Barry Sanders perhaps didn't win a Super Bowl championship or even get to a Super Bowl, okay? You're not a Hall of Fame quarterback. But, Barry Sanders, not that interesting of an interview, a reluctant interviewee, but a very enigmatic guy who did crazy things like asking Dan Patrick if it was okay to buy an Acura. The guy even at that time had to be making $5 or $6 million a year. I think he could afford an Acura. But his image was, I'm very simple. He lived in a sparsely furnished house, as Patrick told you. He didn't like a lot of attention, and so it is kind of a surprise that he would do a documentary, but I'm sure Amazon offered him a lot of money to do it, and he said okay. Coming up in the next hour, we'll hear from Sam Howell, had his news conference yesterday, and Tom Brady. He's already crotchety, Tom Brady. He's been out of the league less than a year. He's 46 years old and sounding like he's 76 years old. I mean, it's music to the ears of Wilbon. You'll hear his reaction to it. But I have some questions about Tom Brady as an analyst next season on Fox if he goes through with that, with what he's now saying and what he's saying to Stephen A. Smith yesterday. We'll get to that and a whole lot more. Plus, Tony's coming up at 11 o'clock as you stay with us on the day before Thanksgiving on ESPN 630. All right, headed into the holiday weekend. I'll be here Friday. Don't forget, we're here 9 to noon, off tomorrow. Tony's got a show coming up at 11 o'clock today, and we'll have football picks in that and other things. We'll get to the Commanders, and we'll get to what Drew Brees said yesterday on our morning show. He said some things about quarterbacking, which are really, really interesting, including what he is as a quarterback now. And remember the shoulder injury that caused the Chargers to give up on him, and he wound up landing in New Orleans and went on to a Hall of Fame career and a Super Bowl championship. If he hadn't had that shoulder injury, he thinks he still could have been playing now. I guess a lot of guys feel that way, but he says he can't throw whatsoever. He's doing a pickleball promotion these days with John McEnroe. He and John. McEnroe's significantly older. I think he's a year younger than I am. Brees is still in his 40s, mid-40s. But they're going on the Ulta-Cocker pickleball circuit, and they've got a paddle which they say is quiet. Okay, we'll get to that. And Tom Brady also. We'll talk about that and what Tony and Mike said about him on PTI yesterday. But let's get into the game tomorrow. Commanders heading to Dallas. And as far as what's going to happen on the field, I guess it's possible they could pull an upset. I don't think it's going to save the job of Ron Rivera. It certainly won't save the season unless, incredibly they go on the 6-game run to end the season and they make it to the playoffs with 10 wins. But come on, I mean, they have been 4-7 before, and they made it. This is when they had 16 games. They made it, I guess, at 9-7 with Joe Gibbs. They were 5-6 in his second year, and they won their last 5 to make it to the playoffs. It's happened, but doesn't look likely with this group. And, the only question now seems to be, will Ron Rivera make it through the rest of the season, or could tomorrow be his last game? I mean, that's entirely, especially if they get completely embarrassed. Now, the one thing he's got going for him is, unlike Josh McDaniels, where the players hated him, players seem to be behind him. He seems to be liked as a coach, and they're as disappointed as he is about the way the season has gone. It has had a shadow hanging over it from the beginning because, remember, when the Josh Harris group took over in July, I think it was July 20th when they were officially approved, one of the first questions was, well, are you going to replace the coach? Well, he wasn't going to do it then. You can't do it, 5 days before training camp. But, is this going to be Josh Harris's guy? Now, the contract complicated things because he had 2 years left, so we got this year. And then are you going to bring him back as a lame duck? I don't think you do that. That almost never happens in the NFL. So if you wanted him back for next year, you're going to have to extend him. Well, in order for Ron Rivera to be extended, this was going to have to be an extraordinary season. You would have had to maybe win 2 playoff games for that to happen. And doesn't look like they're going to get in the playoffs at all this year. So there's that shadow that's been over them the whole year. And in addition to the news conferences that Rivera does, he does a sit-down every Monday with Chick Hernandez of Channel 9. And this question, I think, was crystallized in just the right way to give you a window into how Josh Harris is likely feeling about Ron Rivera. Like anybody who thought this might be a mulligan season for Rivera because of all the turmoil that's gone on and the changes and the things that they couldn't talk to Harris about until July 20th, that maybe this is a throwaway year. No, this is Chick Hernandez with Ron Rivera on Monday.
Ownership, they're brand new. They came in, and I think they pretty much said, look, we've got to find out what we have in all aspects. Did they tell you, look, don't even worry about this year? Like, don't worry about job security, whatever else. Just do the thing, and we'll figure out after the season.
The best thing that they did, they said they're here to support the football team and try and give us every opportunity to be successful. And they've been great. Mr. Harris, all the ownership that has been around have all been great. They've been supportive of the things that we're trying to do. But make no bones about it. It was said that this is about winning, and I respect that, and I got nothing but respect and admiration for the way they've handled themselves, and I really do appreciate the conversations I've had with Mr. Harris.
It was said this is about winning. 4-7 record, which includes 2 losses to a Giants team which has only 3 wins. A Chicago Bears team which has only 3 wins, 1 loss. So they're not good. They're losing games they shouldn't lose, and that would seem to close the door. Any slight crack there might have been between the door and the door jam that Ron Rivera is going to stay, that would seem to slam that shut. Meantime, with all of this going on, you have the young developing quarterback, which is all Rivera can talk about. Well, yeah, I know we stink, but look at this guy. Look at what we're doing here with Sam Howell. But, after what happened last week where Howell got sacked 4 more times and he threw 3 interceptions, he's not doing as much of that. And Howell himself knows that his performance is more than likely going to lead to the firing of his coach, the only coach he's had in his year plus in the NFL, year and a half, and said this to the media about how he's handling it and how the team is handling all of it.
I don't think it's hard. I mean, obviously, everyone knows the business we're in, and at the end of the day, if you're not doing your job, there's things will happen. But us players, coaches, I don't think anyone's really worried about it. We're just trying to do everything we can on a daily basis, and the results are the results. We try to do everything we can in our power to control what we can control, and making sure we come in here each and every day and putting our all into this. And I think everyone has throughout the year, and obviously we've had some disappointing games, but nothing changes. We're going to come in here and give it our all every single day, and the results are what they are.
Yeah, well, 4-7, like Bill Parcells said, you are what your record says you are. This is about learning, and this is what you always hear in a developing quarterback. Well, he's taking his lumps, but he's learning from them. I thought this was pretty good perspective on the learning experience of last week's stunning, well, maybe not stunning, but certainly disappointing loss to the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I watched the game afterwards on Sunday, but it's one of those frustrating things where, it's not like, we got outplayed. We just didn't take care of the football. We were moving the ball up and down the field, but, I had the 3 interceptions. We had, I think, 3 fumbles, and it was just, we literally beat ourselves. And so you can be at peace knowing that that's the reason you lost the game. They didn't come in here and beat us. We beat ourselves. But at the same time, you got to try to fix those issues and make sure you're taking care of the football. But, it's not like we had to turn the ball over 6 times to learn that you can't turn the ball over. We never plan on going into a game and losing the ball 6 times. It was just one of those things where it happened, and we just got to be better because of it.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to stick your hand in a fire to know that it can get burned. So that was a good answer. We didn't have to turn it over 6 times to learn from that. There was that. So, yeah, I mean, as far as the learning experience, there's a limited learning experience when you get embarrassed the way you did against the Giants. This is the last thing, and this, I think, also addresses how the players feel about Ron Rivera and why I believe there won't be a coaching change unless it's just, unless it's just Keystone Cops out there, which it really hasn't been. I mean, the turnovers were terrible, and Howell throwing 3 interceptions is bad. The fumbles are bad, all that. But it doesn't look like they've quit. And this is Howell answering the question about what Rivera said to him when Rivera was seen whispering in his ear after the game Sunday against the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, he just, told me, just keep my head up. We got a lot of football left. But, he's always, he's always had my back, always supported me. So it's fun to play with a coach who's always had my back and always knows how to pick me up and get me back going.
Yeah, and I think some of the other players, most of the other players feel that way. That, the one thing, we had 2 years where reporters were not allowed in the locker room because of the pandemic. Everything was done with news conferences. And so we didn't really get the things that used to trickle out of there. They used to be the leakiest locker room in the league. You'd hear various things about how players were disgruntled about this and that and the other. And the whole Snyder Michigas that was going on, complicated things. Well, last 2 years, I think, last 2 seasons, 2022 and 23, so we didn't have access in 2020 and 2021, but reporters now have access. You're not hearing a lot of things coming out of there, like, oh yeah, it's really bad with Ron. The players don't trust him, or this one, he's lost the locker room. We don't hear that. We did hear that about Josh McDaniels. So I think there are 6 games left for Ron Rivera in Washington. Not 1, not 2, but 6. 6 games left to go, and then everything changes after they play their last game against Dallas, which will either be January 6th or January 7th. Meantime, we got our friend Tom Brady. Tom Brady, remember, had signed this deal or agreed to this deal with Fox that after he retired from playing football that he would be an analyst with them. And I said, I don't know about that, even with all the money. And then Brady said, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to wait a year. I'm not going to start this until the 2024 season. So I'm going to sit out 2023 and enjoy things. So he's been sitting back, doing other things, hanging out with his kids, and I'm sure watching football on Sundays and consuming it in a way that's a lot different now than in the 23 years that he played. And I've known a lot of players over the years, and they'll tell you, yeah, I mean, we play football. We don't really watch a lot of it. Monday Night Football, everybody, oh, you're playing in front of your peers. Well, yeah, but not all of them watch it. Like, you need a little break from it. But now Brady's an observer. I guess the last time he really could do this was during the 2008 season after he hurt his knee and was out for the year. He got hurt in the opener, but that was really in the early stages of his career, relatively speaking. For him it was. He was, 9 years in. And so now he's watching games, and he's looking at what he's seeing. And like a lot of guys who were really great when they played, they kind of have this view. But this was Brady yesterday on the Stephen A. Smith show on ESPN.
I think there's a lot of mediocrity in today's NFL. Yeah. I don't see the excellence that I saw in the past.
Why not? Why not?
I think the coaching isn't as good as it was. I don't think the development of young players is as good as it was. The rules have allowed a lot of bad habits to get into the actual performance of the game. Mm-hmm. So I just think the product, in my opinion, is less than what it's been. I look at a lot of players like Ray Lewis and Rodney Harrison and Ronnie Lott and guys that impacted the game in a certain way, and every hit they would have made would have been a penalty. You hear coaches complaining about their own player being tackled and not necessarily, why don't they talk to their player about how to protect himself? We used to work on the fundamentals of those things all the time. Now they're trying to be regulated all the time. Offensive players need to protect themselves. It's not up to the defensive player to protect the offensive player. A defensive player needs to protect himself. I didn't throw the ball to certain areas because I was afraid players were going to get knocked out. Mm-hmm. That's the reality. Wow. I didn't throw it to the middle when I played Ray Lewis because you knock him out of the game, and I couldn't afford to lose a good player.
Yeah, but a lot of these rules to protect the quarterback were put in because of you. The league didn't want you out for the year like in 2008 because of a knee injury, so they changed the way you're allowed to hit the quarterback. So I find that to be rather interesting from Tom Brady himself. And every time he got hit, he'd throw his hand up in the air. Hey, ref, look at that, Oh, come on. Now, here are the numbers. Scoring in the NFL has declined for the 4th consecutive year. Teams are combining to score just 43.3 points a game, down from 43.8. So it's only half a point, but it's down. And 45.9 in 2021. So it was up almost 2 points a game, more than 2 points a game just 2 years ago. The league is on pace for its lowest scoring season on average since 2009 when teams combined for 42.9 points per game. One likely cause, all the quarterback injuries. Kirk Cousins, out for the year. Deshaun Watson, out for the year. Anthony Richardson, out for the year. Kyler Murray has missed significant time. Aaron Rodgers may not come back after playing only 4 plays this year, so that might be a part of that. But what Tom Brady said is like the Wilbon Concerto. And so when Tony and Mike were reacting to this yesterday on PTI, it was Tony, of course, who gave Wilbon the floor.
Wilbon, go.
Are you kidding? This is music to my ears. How many times do I text you in our 47 usual texts on average on Sunday and some on Monday morning after your podcast and say the NFL is not what it used to be? It isn't. Right. And I go to coaching first. We've gone through the standings, you and I, and Uber producer Matthew Kelleher, and I said, no. This guy couldn't coach 30 years ago when the NFC East was Jimmy Johnson, Bill Parcells, Joe Gibbs, and whoever I'm leaving out. Buddy Ryan. Don't even tell me. And so, Tony, I'm glad to hear the Golden Boy say this. Another place and I know you don't really disagree with that. You and I go back and forth. But the place I disagree with you vehemently, and I told you this, you said, Brady, he's never said anything other than let's go in 30 years, he's not going to be any good. And I say to you, oh, no, 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 no. Brady's going to be great because he saved it all up for 30 years, and now he's ready to go. Pull the string and let him talk.
I understand.
Tony,
I understand.
Brady, this is gold for me, what Tom Brady said, because I agree with every word of it.
Okay, so I found out about the story just a little while ago, so I'm going to look at the notes. And my notes say this is wonderful for you because it hits all your points. Bad coaching, bad quarterbacks, too many penalties. The great thing to me in this is Tom Brady, who you ripped on this show for year after year after year, that he falls down, he just wants a call, he can't be touched. And it's Tom Brady saying we shouldn't be touched, they shouldn't be penalties.
That's right.
So that makes me happy because now you have to love Brady more.
Yeah,
it also sounds like every old man I know. It sounds like you and it sounds like me because I'll just do your lines. Pitchers don't go 9 anymore. Big men aren't in the paint anymore. Safeties can't deliver big hits anymore.
They can't.
Brady is an old man.
Yes.
By modern NFL standards, he's 46 years old. He is an old man.
Yeah.
The last point I want to make is I wish there was some specificity in this. There isn't. They're large, soft pillow balloons as to what's wrong. But I agree with you at the moment that it makes me feel like when Brady gets in the booth, there's a real chance he will be critical.
Not a real chance.
And that would be great.
He's going to be great from moment
that
one.
Would be
and
great.
by the way, specificity, he said the head coaching ain't what it used to be. How much more specific you want to get than that?
Name names. I want names.
That's more than those other guys on TV do. They don't ever criticize head coaching. Ever. I do.
Okay. Now, I think Tony and Mike may be a little off on this idea of Brady criticizing. I think you can be critical of decisions that are made on the field, either by players or by coaches. But if Tom Brady is going to sit in the booth and be paid $37.5 million a year for a television product that Fox pays billions for, might be over $1 billion a year, I think. The league television contract is in the billions, and Fox has as many games as CBS, and so they profit big from that, and they're in the Super Bowl rotation and all that. It's one thing to be critical of decisions that are made, or plays or coaching thing. But to sit in the booth and say, yeah, this isn't as good as it used to be, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think it's going to work for Fox. I don't think it's going to work for the NFL. I know he's Tom Brady, and I know he's the greatest of all time, and he can probably say what he wants to say. But nobody wants to put out a product that you're telling the public is not as good anymore. It's a declining product. You don't want to say that. You're selling the game, and that's big money for both sides. Obviously, television profits from it, and the NFL profits big from the money they get from television. That's a really nice working relationship, and they're going to want to change it. They're not. Nobody is saying, well, the television ratings aren't what they used to be. Let's bring in Tom Brady to tell everybody how bad this product is. That's not going to work. And, yeah, he may be more critical than others, and he has the latitude to do that off of what he did as a player. But businesses don't operate that way. You can't have a restaurant where the waiter goes, hey, welcome to so-and-so's. We've been around for 75 years, and, if you were here 20 years ago, the food would have been really good, but it's just not as good anymore. No. It may be honest, but nobody wants to hear that. So this idea that Brady's going to step in the booth next year and criticize everything he sees and everybody's going to be real happy about that. No, I don't think so. I mean, what created the most booth excitement was Tony Romo when he still knew the players and the teams and he was predicting plays. I think Brady will probably still be able to do that once he gets there, and he's probably got a better view of what he sees in the defenses and things like that. I mean, he can give you an incredible amount of insight into the game because nobody mastered the mental part of football better than Tom Brady. But you can't just stand up there and say, yeah, it's not as good. The coaches stink, the players stink, and they were great when I played. That's a get off my lawn thing. Wilbon does it. I do it. Tony does it. We're all about Tony's older. We're in our 60s or 70s. We do that. Tom Brady's in his 40s, and he's going to have a prime position. He's going to be the number one guy with Kevin Burkhardt on Fox if it goes through next year. just don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's what anybody is after. You're there to push the product, to keep people interested in watching it. And right now, business is good. You don't want to detract from that business. You do not. So there you go. Hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I think it's one of the greatest days of the year. And eat lots of turkey. And then when you're rolling around on Friday morning, I will be here from 9 to noon and recapping what hopefully isn't too embarrassing of a performance in Dallas. Tony is coming up next. He will be back next Tuesday after today, and next Monday, and I will be in for him on Friday. Enjoy the holiday, and I'll see you back here Friday morning at 9 a.m.